The sun hadn't yet burned off the Wyoming mist when the insult landed. "Nice scar," Private Gallow muttered, loud enough for the others to hear. "Looks like someone flunked welding school." He smirked as he passed the lone woman kneeling beside the hydraulic line of an Apache rotor assembly. She didn't look up, didn't flinch, just kept tightening the valve like he wasn't even there. That irritated him more than the silence itself. The scar ran from the side of her neck, curved beneath the collar of her shirt, not red and fresh, but pale, deep, and old. A memory etched into skin. Around them, a few recruits chuckled. One elbowed the guy next to him, another tried to hide a grin. No one knew her name. They just called her the Quiet Mechanic. But by sundown, the entire base would know exactly who she was and what that scar had survived. Stay with this story till the end, because by the time it's over, you'll never look at silence the same way again. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Gallow's boots? And don't forget to subscribe for more true strength stories that speak loudest without saying a word. They didn't even know her name. She'd shown up 2 weeks ago with a clipboard, a battered tool chest, and a base access pass authorized by someone so high up it made the senior staff nervous. No rank insignia, no branch designation. Just a barcode and a signature. Most assumed she was a civilian contractor, just another temp assigned to equipment diagnostics during the pre-deployment cycle at Fort Dunley. She rarely spoke, kept her eyes on the machinery, and worked through lunch. Her uniform was regulation adjacent olive drab cargo pants, tan t-shirt, sleeves rolled, grease under her fingernails. The scar on her neck never healed evenly. They called her the Quiet Mechanic. But she wasn't quiet because she lacked voice. She was quiet because she didn't waste it. Private Gallow, however, didn't care about any of that. At 21, fresh out of infantry pipeline, he saw the world as a proving ground. Swagger meant strength. Noise meant power. Scars were for showing off, not hiding. Especially not on a woman. And she was older, mid-30s maybe. Strong build, sun-darkened skin, posture like someone who'd forgotten how to rest. She was crouched near a flight line crate, elbow deep in the lower access panel of a drone support rig when Gallow approached again. "Gotta say, ma'am," he said, leaning in like he was about to share a joke, "if that scar's from combat, I'm surprised you made it back at all. Or maybe you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, huh?" She didn't react, just reached for a torque wrench without looking. That infuriated him. "No patch, no rank, no name," he said louder. "Come on. Were you even military, or just one of those civvies who played operator and got burned?" Still, no response. Around them, a few recruits paused. The clang of equipment in the hangar slowed. Someone whispered under their breath, "Due to drop it." But Gallow didn't drop it. He was performing, and like most performers, he mistook discomfort for an audience. She finished tightening the bolt, wiped her hands on a rag, and stood slowly. Not defensively, not confrontationally. Just completely still, calm in a way that unnerved everyone. Her eyes met his. Not angry, not cold, just steady, focused. Like a lens that had already decided what it saw. He blinked, almost stepping back, but forced a grin instead. "You ever gonna tell us who you are, or is this part of the act?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. From the far side of the tarmac, the low hum of an approaching vehicle echoed. An unmarked military SUV rolled to a stop near the hangar's edge. The doors didn't open right away. Then, slowly, deliberately, a man stepped out. Combat boots, 4 stars. Deep lines etched into a face that had seen too much and smiled too little. The recruits froze. General Silas Aaron. Why was he here? The mechanic didn't move. Didn't even glance toward the vehicle. She was already bracing for it. Not out of fear but familiarity. Gallow swallowed. The general's gaze swept across the group, then locked on her. He took a few steps forward, stopping just short of the drone cradle. And then, in a voice dry as gravel and twice as heavy, he spoke 2 words. "Reaper Echo." Everything stopped. Private Gallow laughed, but it was hollow, no reflexive, not confident. "Reaper what?" he scoffed, looking around. "That's supposed to mean something?" It did, just not to him yet. But others had frozen mid-motion. A corporal paused while loading crates. One of the drone techs dropped his spanner. Somewhere near the fuel line, a sergeant whispered, "No way." The general didn't acknowledge Gallow's mockery. He didn't need to. His attention stayed fixed on the woman in front of him. Her expression hadn't changed. Neither had her posture. She stood with her hands relaxed at her sides, eyes locked on a point just beyond the hangar wall somewhere far away. General Aaron took another step forward, this one slower, heavier. "You boys want to talk about scars?" he said evenly, voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "Then maybe you should know what hers means." He looked at Gallow, not with anger but with disappointment so sharp it stung. "You just ran your mouth at Reaper Echo," he said. "The last survivor of Ember Gate." Someone exhaled like they'd been punched in the chest. Gallow looked around again, trying to read the room, but it had already changed. The mood was no longer discomfort. It was dread. What's Ember Gate?" one of the younger recruits finally asked, his voice barely above a breath. The general didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked to the mechanic. No, not the mechanic anymore. Kiera Voss. That was her real name. But for a long time, she hadn't been called that. She hadn't heard her name spoken in public since the mission. And she didn't speak now, either. So the general did it for her. 4 years ago, Aaron said, slowly pacing in front of the group, a 6-person infiltration unit was dropped into the Jorak wastes. No air cover, no satellites, no extraction plan. He let the sentence hang. They were tasked with confirming intel on a facility producing weaponized accelerants, the type that leave nothing but bones behind. Operation code name, Ember Gate. The recruits were silent now, ears tuned like radios. "They made it inside," Aaron continued. "Confirmed the intel. But the moment they broke contact with HQ, the facility erupted in fire. A pressure rig detonated. No warning. 3 dead on impact. 1 we never found." He stopped, turned. That left 2. His eyes went to her again. She hadn't moved. One with a shattered pelvis and 3rd-degree burns, and her Reaper Echo, lungs blistered from smoke. Vision gone in one eye, skin sloughing off her left arm. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't need to. His voice stayed flat, clinical, because that made it worse. She didn't call for help. There was no help coming. She dragged him 62 kilos of barely breathing weight through 6 miles of charred forest, built a travois from a busted rifle and her own flak vest, tore her fingers open on the roots. The general's voice dipped lower. She crawled the last 300 yards on her knees, still on fire. Now the recruits weren't just quiet, they weren't even blinking. Gallow's mouth had gone dry. And the woman who had been wiping down grease bolts an hour ago still hadn't said a word. Because she didn't need to. She'd lived what none of them could imagine. And now, every person in that hangar finally realized they weren't standing in the presence of a mechanic. They were standing in the presence of a ghost who never asked to be remembered, but was, finally, being seen. No one moved. Even the wind outside seemed to pause, as if it too needed a second to understand what had just been said. Reaper Echo. The name wasn't on any official roll calls. It wasn't etched into medals or printed in briefings. It existed in the kind of stories passed down in low voices, between veterans who knew what silence meant. Between medics who'd seen what survival looked like when it wasn't supposed to happen. The kind of name you didn't say out loud unless you were sure. And General Silas Aaron had been very, very sure. Private Gallow stood rigid now. Not because he respected her yet, but because fear was beginning to feel an awful lot like shame. He looked at the woman, Kiera Voss. Though no one had said her full name yet, something finally registered. It wasn't just the scar. It was how she carried it. Not like a wound, like a weight. The scar itself was brutal, a thick, pale arc starting just beneath her left ear, traveling across her collarbone and vanishing under her shirt. The kind of scar that didn't come from surgery or training mishaps. The kind of scar that changed the way your body healed everything else afterward. And yet, she wore it like it wasn't decoration or deformity. She wore it like it was hers. Kiera didn't look at Gallow. She didn't look at anyone. She just stepped back to the maintenance rig, retightened a fuel valve, and kept working. But the general wasn't finished. "She never asked for recognition," Aaron said, quieter now. "Didn't want a ceremony. Refused a commendation." A few of the recruits glanced at one another, uncertain if they were supposed to respond. She asked for one thing, he continued, a new assignment, one where she could work, be useful, quietly. He turned, scanning the hangar, letting the pause settle into every gut and rib cage. She asked to come here. Gallow blinked, confused. Wait, why here? The general's gaze sharpened, not angry, just piercing. Because this is where the next ones come from, he said. And she remembers what happens when training fails. Kiera's wrench clicked into place with a soft tunk. She adjusted the line again, kept her back to them all. Because none of this was for her. It was for them. The recruits had started to shift now. Stiff postures softened. Smirks dissolved. One of them, Reed, maybe slowly stepped away from the group and stood at parade rest. Not because protocol demanded it, but because something deeper did. She's not your instructor, the general added. She's not here to run drills or sign your forms. She's here because she asked to carry her silence somewhere it mattered. His voice dropped just above a whisper, but somehow it carried louder than before. She came back because she knows what it means to leave someone behind. Silence returned. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It was earned. Across the hangar, Kiera set the wrench down gently, reached for a fresh rag, and wiped her hands without urgency. Someone in the group cleared their throat quiet, almost apologetic. No one else spoke. Because no one wanted to break whatever just settled in the air. They didn't see the grease on her hands anymore. They saw the scar. They saw what she'd lived through. And for the first time, they understood it wasn't the fire that made her dangerous. It was the fact that she walked back into it. General Aaron didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence around him had become so absolute that every word now landed with the weight of a hammer. Even the hum of the hangar's fluorescent lights felt louder than anyone dared speak. He looked out across the line of recruits, boys and girls, barely into their 20s, still too young to recognize the gravity of the uniform they wore. And in front of them, Kiera Voss, her scar catching the overhead light like a seam in forged steel, stood motionless. Not at attention, not defiant, just grounded. As if the earth itself had settled beneath her boots. You think scars mean failure? The general asked, tone like cooled iron. You think silence is weakness? His gaze fell briefly on Private Gallow, who had not moved in 5 minutes. The bravado that once radiated from him had collapsed inward, leaving only the kind of stillness that comes with realization and regret. I'm going to tell you a story, Aaron said, stepping to the side and resting his hand on a nearby crate. Not for balance, but as if anchoring himself to the present. And I want you to listen, not with your ears, with whatever part of you still remembers what it means to earn this uniform. No one dared shift. No one even blinked. Operation Ember Gate wasn't public. It didn't make the news. There were no parades, no flags. It was the kind of mission that doesn't exist outside of footnotes and classified archives. He nodded toward Kiera. And the people on it? They weren't just soldiers, they were problem solvers, fire eaters, sent in when everything else failed. He paused. 6 went in. The recruits listened like school children hearing the start of a ghost story. They were inserted under radar into a dense belt of disputed terrain. The objective: confirm the presence of a heat-triggered chemical accelerator, something that, if ignited, could burn through armor and bone in under 30 seconds. A few throats tightened. They found the facility. But the intel underestimated the instability of the compound. He tapped his fingers lightly against the metal of the crate. They made entry. 36 minutes later, something ruptured. A misstep, a trap, maybe fate. His voice was steady, but Kiera, still facing the drone, closed her eyes for a moment. Brief, barely perceptible, but real. 3 gone instantly. 4th, incinerated beyond recognition. That left 2. Aren's eyes shifted. One of them was Sergeant Paul Knox, squad leader. Took a pipe shrapnel spike straight through the hip. Compound fracture, multiple burns, spine exposed, still breathing. And the other, his voice lowered just a fraction, was Reaper Echo. Someone near the back finally whispered, "Her." Aaron nodded. She took a pressure wave that crushed her rib cage. Smoke inhalation so severe, her voice was gone for 2 days. Burns down her left arm, back, and neck. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. He stepped forward. She built a sled out of melted armor and steel wiring, loaded Knox onto it, and pulled him, dragged him through 6.5 miles of fire-blasted terrain. No medevac, no map, no food, for 3 days. Several of the recruits instinctively looked at her hands that had been tightening bolts an hour ago. Calloused, scarred, steady. She reached the checkpoint, bleeding from the soles of her feet. Her left eye swollen shut, crawled the last 300 yards on her knees, because standing wasn't an option anymore. He let the silence settle again. She didn't ask for honors. She didn't want to be written into a report. She asked for disappearance. Now even Gallow looked shaken, like his skin no longer quite fit. "You're not looking at a cautionary tale," the general said. "You're looking at someone who finished the mission when everyone else couldn't." He turned away, only briefly, as if gathering the right words. "You think she's here because someone owed her a desk job?" he asked, voice rising just a notch, not anger but precision. "You think this is charity?" Oren's stare moved down the line. She could have taken retirement, could have signed her name and walked away with full benefits and a seat at the table. Instead, he nodded toward Kiera again. "She asked for this post. Right here. Fort Dunley. The most difficult, thankless assignment in pre-deployment training." "Why?" someone whispered before they could stop themselves. Aaron looked directly at them. "Because she remembers what happens when soldiers aren't ready." Kiera finally turned, slowly. Not for drama, not for confrontation, just enough to let them see her face the scar, the steadiness, the complete lack of apology. And in that moment, something shifted in every recruit standing there. They didn't just see a scar anymore. They saw a line someone had crossed and survived, and came back not to be seen but to make sure they could survive too. Kiera didn't hear the recruits anymore, didn't see the hangar or the pale Wyoming sky outside. When General Oren spoke of the checkpoint, of crawling, of Knox's voice in her ear, she was already gone. Back there. Back in the heat. The trees had no leaves, just jagged trunks, blackened and steaming. The air shimmered with poison and ash. When the wind blew, it carried the chemical stench of burnt plastic and something worse, something human. The sky had turned orange by the second night. That's when her hearing began to warp. Echoes lost their source. Her breath came shorter, sharper. Her ribs shifted like broken scaffolding. Every time she exhaled, it sounded like gravel in a paper bag. She kept pulling the sled anyway. It had been Knox's idea. Rig a frame out of 2 half-melted I-beams from the facility's collapsed entry gate. Strip her ruined vest and wrap the frame. Slide what was left of him onto it, and go. "Southwest," he whispered. "Stick to the low ridge." His words were slurred. He didn't know she couldn't hear him well. Her left ear was gone. Gone like Ramos, like Colby, like the others. They'd been 6. Now she was 1.5. She remembered the first time her knees gave out. It was on the incline past the blast crater. Her hands slipped on the frame, skin peeling back from her palms. Her throat was bleeding. She didn't remember screaming, but the blood was there anyway. She wanted to rest. Just for a second. But Knox had stirred. "If I pass out," he rasped, "don't stop." So she didn't. The third night, it rained. Not clean rain, not water. The kind of drizzle that left acid streaks on burned bark and hissed when it touched skin. She covered Knox's face with what was left of her sleeve. She didn't cover her own. She kept dragging. At one point, the ridge gave way and sent both of them tumbling. She hit the ground face first, stone tearing open her cheekbone. The scar still remembered that moment. Still twitched sometimes when she turned too quickly in her sleep. She couldn't stand anymore after that. So she crawled. She gripped the frame with fingers that no longer bent fully and pulled with what her shoulders had left. Every inch forward scraped her knees raw. Her blood soaked into the blackened soil and disappeared. But still, she pulled. In the hangar, her breathing had changed. Just slightly. General Aaron noticed. So did one of the drone mechanics behind her, but no one said anything. Because something sacred was unfolding, silent, unwelcome, and real. She remembered hallucinating wolves. Glowing eyes between trees that weren't there. Colby's voice whispering just behind her, asking for help, even though she'd watched Colby burn. She remembered coughing so hard she thought her chest had split. And she remembered the sound of Knox's breath rattling, shallow, soft, still alive. So she pulled. By the fourth morning, the ridge broke into a clearing. Smoke had faded. Light was returning. And somewhere beyond the twisted roots and low stone outcrop, she saw a silver glint. A radio antenna. The outer checkpoint, 300 yards. No cover, no more shade, no adrenaline left. She tried to stand. Couldn't. So she let the sled's frame fall forward and crawled after it. She doesn't remember the last hour. Only that she woke up on a gurney with an oxygen mask over her mouth and someone yelling, "She's still burning! Get the gel now!" She passed out before she could answer the first question. When the debrief came weeks later, she didn't give details. Didn't mention the hallucinations, or the rain, or what Knox had whispered when he thought she couldn't hear him cry. She just asked for one thing: let me disappear. Back in the hangar, Kiera opened her eyes again. She hadn't moved, hadn't cried, hadn't clenched her fists, but her jaw ached from holding everything in. The recruits hadn't spoken either. Some stared at her. Some stared at the floor. Private Gallow looked like he wanted to vanish. General Aaron's voice broke the stillness again, low and clear. "You think strength means shouting louder? Running faster?" He shook his head once. "Strength is crawling through fire while your body gives out. Strength is dragging someone who's already told you to leave them." He looked to Kiera. She could have dropped him. She didn't respond. He didn't expect her to. She didn't come back because she needed redemption. She came back because somewhere out there, there's another Ember Gate waiting. The general took a step back. "And she wants you ready for it." Kiera exhaled through her nose. It sounded like a storm passing. A few moments later, a voice from the line spoke. This one softer. Reed, the youngest recruit, still barely 19. Did Sergeant Knox survive?" Kiera turned her head slightly, met his eyes, and nodded. One simple nod. Reed swallowed. Then slowly raised his hand in silent salute. He wasn't alone. A second followed, then a third. Soon, every recruit on the hangar floor, whether they knew her story in full or not, was standing straighter, their eyes steady, their silence earned. Kiera didn't ask for it. She didn't nod back, but she didn't look away either. Because for the first time since she came back, they finally saw her. The recruits didn't know what to do with their hands now. Some let them fall naturally to their sides. Others kept them behind their backs, trying to stand like soldiers. But it didn't matter. No one was pretending anymore. They weren't staring at a technician with a scar. They were looking at someone who chose to come back after the fire. General Aaron let the silence hold for a moment longer. Then he turned to face the row of cadets directly. "She didn't have to return," he said, voice leveled but firm. "You all understand that, don't you?" No one answered. So he continued. "She could have taken medical retirement, gone home, full benefits, hero's package. No one would have questioned her. Hell, she could have vanished, and the government would have protected the silence with 2 layers of red tape and a file marked sealed indefinitely." His jaw tensed as he scanned their faces. But she came back. He turned, this time addressing her. "Tell them why, Echo." Kiera didn't speak, but her head lifted slightly. Not in pride, in clarity. Then, after a long beat, she said 4 words, the first words most of them had ever heard from her. Because they never were. The room paused. General Aaron gave her space, waiting. She went on, voice low, unhurried, hoarse around the edges like it hadn't been used in years. "The 5 who didn't come back, they weren't the reckless ones. They weren't weak. They did everything right. But someone, somewhere, didn't brief us properly. Someone skipped a step. Someone approved a faulty heat map. And the blast caught us off guard." She looked toward the recruits now. Not to accuse, but to explain. "The failure didn't happen there. It happened before we ever left the ground." One recruit shifted uneasily. Another swallowed hard. "So I asked for Fort Dunley," she said. "Not because I wanted to be saluted, not to wear a title, but because this is where it starts." She motioned slightly to the hangar. "The gear. The people. This is where you learn how to pay attention. How to take orders that don't make sense and ask the right questions anyway. How to read terrain. How to read each other, because if you can't do it here, she paused. You won't survive there. No dramatics. No tears. Just truth. She reached down, picked up the rag she'd been using earlier, and wiped her fingers, now stained with a mixture of oil and blood. One small cut had split open along her knuckle when she tightened the final bolt. No one commented. Because every person in that room finally understood. She wasn't here to relive her story. She was here to prevent theirs from ending the same way. General Aaron looked at the recruits one last time. She's not your teacher, he said. She's your warning. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Kiera didn't watch him go. She simply folded her rag and went back to her tools. As if nothing extraordinary had happened. Because for her, it hadn't. This the quiet, the scars, the mission that never left her. This was ordinary. This was her choice. The mess hall at Fort Dunley always sounded the same at dusk. Trays clattering, boots scuffing linoleum, metal scraping against metal. The kind of noise that didn't mean anything, just filled the air so the silence wouldn't. But that night after the hangar, after the story, after the scar finally had a name, something had changed. People still spoke, but they did it softer. Laughter still came, but not the loud kind. No one rushed to the front of the line. No one bumped past the older mechanic without muttering, "Excuse me." And for the first time in 2 weeks, no one called her the quiet one anymore. They didn't call her anything. Because now they knew. She sat in her usual spot back corner, near the window where the sun dipped behind the ridgeline. A table built for 6, occupied by 1. Same tray, same meal, same methodical way of eating. Like every bite was fuel, nothing more. Kiera Voss didn't eat quickly. She didn't scroll a phone. She didn't make eye contact. She just sat and chewed, fork in her right hand, left fingers still bruised from the drone rig. It had become habit by now, eating alone. But that night, something broke the pattern. A tray slid onto the table across from hers. She didn't look up. The recruit who sat down didn't say a word. No apology, no nervous laugh, no small talk. He just sat, quietly, chewing his food the same way she did. Slowly, thoughtfully, respectfully. Then another tray arrived. Then another. By the time the 5th seat was filled, not one of them had spoken. Kiera didn't stop eating. But she set her fork down for a moment and let herself breathe through her nose, slow, steady. She didn't smile. But the way her shoulders dropped said more than any thank you ever could. Private Gallow was the last one. He didn't sit right away. He stood behind the 6th chair for a few seconds, holding his tray like it weighed more than it should have. He didn't make eye contact. Not yet. But he pulled the chair out and sat anyway. The full table was quiet. Not awkward quiet. Earned quiet. No one there needed to explain why they'd come. No one needed to say they were wrong, or sorry, or didn't know. Because she hadn't come back to be forgiven, and they hadn't come to forgive themselves. They came because they finally understood what it meant to be led by someone who didn't need to be heard to be followed. A few minutes passed. Somewhere in the kitchen, someone dropped a pan. No one at the table flinched. Then one of the younger recruits leaned in, voice barely audible. "Why Reaper Echo?" Kiera didn't blink, didn't change expression, didn't rush the answer. She just kept her eyes on her tray and said, calm as breath, "Because I buried 26. I'm number 27. No one asked a second question. No one filled the silence that followed. Because some numbers don't belong in conversations. They belong in memory. And that night, for the first time since she returned, Kiera Voss didn't eat alone. No speeches were made that night. No formal acknowledgments. No one asked for a photo, or a retelling, or a medal to be pinned. But something shifted not just in the recruits who shared her table, but in the entire atmosphere of Fort Dunley. The next morning, the clatter on the training field was crisper. Voices carried differently, not louder, just more focused. When drills were called, they lined up faster. No one rolled their eyes. No one slouched. And when Kiera Voss walked across the tarmac, grease still on her sleeves, scars still visible in the morning light, no one looked away anymore. They didn't salute her. She didn't want that. But they stepped aside. Not in fear, not in awe, in respect, because now they understood something that every real soldier learns too late. True strength doesn't wear a spotlight. It bleeds in silence. It survives without permission, and it trains without needing to be thanked. Kiera never told her story again. She never needed to. They carried it now, each of them, not as gossip, not as rumor, but as a reminder that the ones who speak the least often carry the most, that scars aren't warnings, they're instructions, and that every lesson she taught from that moment forward wasn't spoken with words. It was written in burned flesh, calloused hands, and the discipline of showing up anyway. She hadn't come back to be seen. But in the end, that's exactly what happened. They saw her, and they would never forget her. This story isn't just about a scar or a name whispered in classified reports. It's about what real strength looks like when no one's watching. Kiera Voss didn't need applause. She didn't speak to prove anything. She came back not to be honored, but to make sure no one else had to crawl through what she did. And that's the lesson. In a world obsessed with being seen, true leadership often walks in silence. It shows up bruised, scarred, and uncelebrated, and still chooses to serve. The scars we carry, whether on our skin or in our memory, aren't signs of weakness. They're signs we endured, and that someone else might not have to. You never know who's quietly holding everything together. So next time you see someone who doesn't speak much, who keeps their head down, who just works, I don't underestimate them. They might just be the one who carried 26 others. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell us what part stayed with you most. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that honor the unseen, the quiet, and the brave. Your silence might echo louder than you think.